Rescue hooks to rescue, Mayday! Get ahead, West. Bad Mayday, what's your location? Get the panel out of here, hurry up! We need radio silence, baby. Water in that 2.5-inch line. 48 inch water in a 2.5-inch line. To the roof, to the roof, to the roof. 35 in the rear, 35 in the rear.
Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Hey there, welcome back to the Emergency Traffic Podcast, where we discuss firefighters and paramedic line of duty deaths to remember them and learn from these tragedies so that we can prevent them from happening in the future. This is a point in time where we gather on the Tailboard and talk about various subjects. This is Tailboard Talk number 18 in May of 2024. We're talking about church and challenging buildings like hangar fires, etc. Please join Doug, Denny, and I as we review these things and talk about some key points in these low-frequency but very challenging fires that often lack pre-planning, adequate water flows. We talk about alternate water supply practices. We encourage you to get access to these buildings and pre-plan them or at least tour them to promote prevention and educate the occupants on fire risks. Also, these are often spot to beware of renovations by amateur DIYers, which can lead to some fires in these buildings that are very difficult to extinguish. So grab a coffee and join us on the Tailboard.
Right. So the reason church fires are important is because we go to them very rarely. Most of us in our career will never go to a church fire because there's just not that many churches and they don't often catch fire. But generally speaking, that's what happens to churches. They catch fire. And that's how they disappear. They disappear from the community. And when they do disappear from the community, if it's an active church, there's a serious impact socially and spiritually on the community with the loss of that church. And in many cases, the church contains valuable birth and death records. I know there's better ways that those are kept now, but in lots of times, pre-computer and pre-county and other government organizations, those records are still kept in old churches. Plus, there's valuable artifacts that are kept in the churches, community markers, plaques on the wall. There's a lot of history in a church, so you don't want to lose one if you can help it. But architecturally, they're very different buildings. There's probably nothing else in your jurisdiction that's built like a church. And so because there's nothing else in your jurisdiction that's built like a church, and you don't go to church fires very often, generally speaking, if you haven't thought long and hard about how you're going to address a church fire, then you're probably going to do a poor job of dealing with a church fire. Churches are not generally inspected under the fire code. There's specific exemptions for the sacristy portion, which is, the main part of the church. Those are exempt from fire code, certainly in Canada. So the only parts you can actually code enforce is the assembly hall, which is often the basement. Often there's a kitchen and a catering hall in the basement, and we all know with cooking equipment and so forth that there's a problem with that. A lot of churches are fairly old and they've been retrofitted to be with electrical. So when electrical first came in early in the 20th century, that they were retrofitted electrically. So could be 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old electrics, not just necessarily good condition, rodent attack, building shifts. So electrical fires are not uncommon. Most of the work that's done in churches is done by volunteers because they cannot afford, generally speaking, the congregation to hire professional contractors. So I know some people are not going to like this, but some of that work is probably not done to the quality that's necessary to make the building safe. So fires do occur. And then there's lightning strikes because they tend to be quite tall. And if they're lightning arresters and cables and so forth are not in good condition and not effective, then you can easily get a lightning fire on the church, which would be a roof fire. So, and the churches are old, they're heavy timber construction. And so heavy timber construction's got a lot of wall voids and so forth. So if you get a fire in the basement of a church, it's going to spread very rapidly up the walls and into the roof. If you get a lightning strike on a church, it's going to be a roof fire, could start in the spire, could start in the roof. and so there's issues there. Lots of times the roofs are there's like two roofs really. There's the exterior roof, which is the weather roof, and inside of that you've got a vault or other type of structure that's usually wood. So you've got this void space, like a cockloft sort of, um, between the weather roof and the inner ceiling slash roof. So you've got a space in there where you can get a fire. The roofs tend to be very steep, so you're not likely to put a standard roof ladder up there and do any kind of work on that particular roof, like cutting a vent hole or something like that. It's going to be difficult. So all of these things need to be in your plans. You need aerial trucks, you need water supply, you need to get to the fire. There's no point in being inside in the sacristy and shooting water at a wooden ceiling where the fire is on the other side of the ceiling. You're not going to put it out. So, so the result of most of this is that the churches burned down, and everything of value in them, or virtually everything of value in them, except what you might manage to get out through a lot of effort, is going to be lost. And so I think that communities that have these churches really need to be seriously thinking about how they're going to attack these fires, how they're going to be effective. We had a fire quite recently that I saw on the news, and the firefighters were spraying water on the roof. They weren't getting the water where it needed to go, and there's always concerns about like taking out panes in the rose window at the front of the church in order to get an aerial stream up into the space where it needs to get in, cutting holes in the walls so you can put water between the weather roof and the interior ceiling, getting in there. So, but in the long run, any damage you do putting the fire out is damage that can be repaired, because once the church burns down completely, there is no repair that's possible. And you look at what they did with Notre Dame in Paris, where they actually got firefighters up into the roof structure and put the fire out that was in the roof. Now, Notre Dame's not your standard church, but I'm just saying that's essentially what needed to be done in that case. That was started by roofers, and there have been church fires started by roofers also, I will tell you. So anyway, that's just kind of an overview of the whole thing from my perspective.
One of the biggest things that I was going to say, you mentioned it, is you need aerial trucks. Well, every small town, every town in North America has a church. Some of them are really far away from the nearest aerial truck, so you could be behind the eight ball to even get started.
And that's, mutual aid, automatic aid, those kind of things, but it's going to delay you for sure. But I mean, they're out there. They are available, but you need to, the key, like you said, Denis, is pre-planning. And you mentioned like Notre Dame is not your average church. No, but there are similar churches, smaller, but still similar type architecture all over North America. That, I mean, my wife and I got a tour of a church in Savannah, Georgia. We were there vacationing, walking around, beautiful architecture, all that kind of stuff. And we happened to meet a guy, and he gave us a tour of the building. And like you say, in Notre Dame, they called it the forest in that cockloft, that false ceiling, right? And delayed alarm, same as the last podcast we just recorded about an industrial fire, and the alarm was delayed. Well, the same thing happened in Notre Dame. Inexperienced people, they didn't even know where the fire was supposedly, and they went to the wrong area to look for it based on the descriptions they weren't familiar with. And so these are all things, and those are excellent videos on YouTube about the Notre Dame fire, for sure. But, I remember we were talking, I think it was on the podcast a long time ago. There was a place, I know Dirk and I were talking about it. The fire department actually drove the aerial ladder into the church to reach the ceiling, that false ceiling area. Somehow they were able to get a small truck. Many of the European aerials are small, and somehow they were able to get in there, because that's going to be the logistics that you have to overcome. Notre Dame, for example, they were really worried about the bells, the timbers around the bells, and the bells falling in the towers. And a huge cultural symbol. I mean, it was Notre Dame is a big piece of Paris's culture, and it was important to take care of it. Well, that's the same if you're in any other small community where the church is a center of it. It's been there forever, and it's part of the culture of the community. You need to pre-plan it. Where do I get water? How much water is available? I was teaching at a local fire college, and we did a hydrant flow test as part of the fire inspector training to do a hydrant flow test. And right beside the main campus buildings, the hydrant flow was 3,000 liters a minute, theoretical. Like, what are you going to do with that? You're not going to put out a big 200 by 200 building with 3,000 liters a minute. So what is the water flow at your nearby church? Access.
So
Can you get at it? Right? Can you get inside? Can you get around it? They're not only old buildings either. There's some really big modern churches with unique roof lines and stuff like that. If any building needs to be pre-planned, I mean, maybe not for life safety, because usually you don't hear a lot of fatalities in churches, maybe firefighters, but not civilians, because people can get out. Although the basements always worry me, and the gathering areas where the electrical might be bad, or the fire risk, Christmas trees, candles, etc. But they're not your standard building. Copenhagen, it wasn't a church, but look at that building in Copenhagen that just burned from the 1700s. It was under renovations, as was Notre Dame. And, what were they following NFPA 241, for example, about hot work and construction and stuff? And once they're going, what do? Pre-planning, delayed alarms. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about this. I know it's a pet peeve for us, and I just want to bring it up here on the tailboard. Watering the roof. I think Denis coins it as, what are roofs made to do? Shed, repel water. Why spray water on a roof during a fire? Same with the airplane hangar, right? We've seen a few big airplane hangars go up here, and you see the ladder trucks go up, and I think Dirk says ladder trucks go up and the buildings go down. The ladder should not be way up in the air spraying down on the roof. It should be through a window, like you mentioned, Denis. If you lose the building, the stained glass doesn't matter anymore. So, break it open, try to put the fire out. You need to be aggressive with these buildings and try to use a smoothbore nozzle. That fog nozzle, straight stream, just doesn't have the punch at distance in the wind when you have a well-involved fire in that building. And this is not a building you're going to bring your 1 3/4 into, because there's going to be more fire load than that. Those are kind of my thoughts about church fires, and we need to pre-plan them. We've all seen them, and it so many times it's a loss.
so fundamentally, the best fire is the one you prevent. So and I kind of took the attitude that churches in my jurisdiction was, even if I didn't have full authority under the fire code to enforce changes, it was always good to have a conversation with the minister, and usually the minister works with an executive committee, but to have a conversation with those people in the parish or the community about what they could do to protect their most valuable asset, which is their church. And things like getting rid of deep frying, for instance, so they didn't need to have that risk that was there. So they can do catering, yes, but you can cater with a microwave or bring your food in and
Air fryer.
yeah, right. It's much safer for the building. You're less likely to have a problem. Controlling hot work, like you'd already mentioned, if you're having any work done in the church, like for instance, you got frozen pipes in the wintertime, and one of your local parishioners brings in a propane torch, goes under the cupboards in the basement, thaws the piping out for you, and the church burns down at 2 a.m. Well, that was a preventable incident. You should not have agreed to allow that to happen. Your volunteer maintenance personnel need to be extremely competent. They need to go through a full hot work process, because, and ditto with your roofers, particularly with roofers, they use heat in their process for most of them, and not regular shingling. But so, being proactive with a lot of these things, having your electrical, that circuit we used the breaker used to flick all the time. So, we put a bigger breaker in. We took out the fuses and put, pennies in behind the fuses. These are all things that I have seen. And, they're all done with the best of intentions, but they're the wrong thing to do. Changing out a light bulb because you want more light and putting a 200-watt halogen bulb in where there should only be a 60-watt before, and fixing the breaker so that would work. So there's all kinds of things like that, the local people, the committee that manages the maintenance on that church needs to be aware of. And as a fire chief or an inspector, you can contribute in many ways to their knowledge of how these things are dangerous, and the strong need to be vigilant, because the consequences are that you could lose this most important focal point in your small community.
Yeah, a good friend of mine that I camp with quite a bit. Actually, he's retired from one of the big grain companies here in Alberta. So he used to be in charge of the grain elevators and stuff. So he's very familiar. He's an engineer as well and familiar with construction and stuff. The church is so fortunate to have him as head of their maintenance committee, and him and I get into some detailed discussions about stuff they're doing to keep the building up and stuff like that. And they have lots of roof problems and leakage problems, and they're trying to use roofers, like you say, and yet not damage the building at the same time as they're fixing the envelope. I'm a little curious. I'm going to have to do more investigations here, because in my mind, in Alberta, I'm a safety codes officer here. We can inspect churches. It's a A1 or A2 public place of assembly. I'm not
It's
sure. I don't know what kept me out of it.
I believe just the sacristy itself, in other words, the main part of what everybody would consider the church, I believe is specifically exempt under the fire code, but everything else in the building is within the
I,
fire code. But I believe the church itself is exempt. Certainly was in Ontario.
I got to
And
look
I
at
don't,
that, because that's something
yeah,
that's new to me.
yeah.
Interesting.
But I mean, there's no clear boundary as to what's in and what's out. So,
Right.
but that's worth looking at. But uh, from a firefighting approach, doing a pre-plan on this, you need to understand how your church is constructed. So if you've just got the roof on open rafters and you can see that from inside, then you've got access to the underside of the roof if there's a fire. If you've got a decorative, truss ceiling that's got hidden structure, hidden spaces above, then you've definitely got a much more major problem getting access to a roof fire, which, as I said before, could be caused by bad electrical, old electrical, or caused by a lightning strike. And if you have a steeple or a tower on that church, then you've got another area that's generally difficult to get into, and you need to have, you go up and you get into the balcony, into the choir loft, and there's this little door that's made for a child, virtually, to get up and climb up into the tower. So there's no way a packed up firefighter is going to get up
Yeah.
in there. So don't be coy. Get your aerial that you've already pre-planned and is running on the first alarm to go to this thing. Get your chainsaw out and cut a door.
Yeah.
Get in there, do what you got to do. If you got to cut the steeple off, it's burning down. If you got to cut the steeple off and tilt it into the yard and save the rest of the church, you've converted a $3 million repair job into a $100,000 repair job, and it's a good move.
Even the modern churches, though, like we do yoga twice a week in a local church here in my community, and every local church I go to for whatever reasons, concerts or something like that, I always look at the old ceiling fans on the ceiling turning slowly and wonder how overheated they are and the wiring for them. And everybody's always added a LCD projector, and they've cut some holes in the drywall and they've fished some wires through, and there's plug-ins and there's spotlights and stuff. And I just look at all these things and go, wow. The one church here at the university in Lacombe here, it used to be terrible for exit signs and all that kind of stuff. But I know somebody went through there and got them to clean up their act, because it's a lot better now. But these risks are out there, and they're just waiting to happen. And every community in North America, there's some forms of churches and stuff. So
You do them no favors by ignoring that.
yeah, exactly.
So one of the
Doug,
things,
you ever been Doug, you ever been to a church fire?
Not that I can think of. I've been to alarms and all the other calls, but not a fire. No, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think I have either that I can think of.
fires in the basement and the lower areas, yeah, smoke in the building, hot spots. I've been to those. I've never been to a raging church fire, which is probably a good thing, because I likely would have lost it also.
And thankfully, lots of the alarms calls I've been to haven't been fires, because they don't let the fire alarm disturb their church service.
Oh,
no,
okay.
They're all still inside in church.
Oh,
and somebody went and silenced the alarm, and
Yeah.
then we show up and have to figure, like, it's
Like an
So
airport, they're all the same. No one's
yeah.
getting out of the airport. I've been through
But
security. I'm not leaving because that alarm's going off.
But there are tactics. I mean, getting an aerial and adequate water supply there is important. But this fire that I saw recently, there was an aerial there. It had a nice fog stream running on the roof. So unless you're willing to take one of these decorative windows out and you're willing to hit the inside where the fire is with a smooth bore pumping significant amounts of water. Um, there's no need to pump in 200 gallons a minute for 3 hours. That's going to do nothing. You want to pump in 1,700 gallons a minute for 20 minutes and put it on target and put the damn fire out, because every fire will burn down to garden hose size eventually. So, it's all about putting more water on than there is fire, and putting it in the right place. So you got to think about those things. You can also look at Bresnan distributors if you don't have the ability to get an aerial there in time. If you know where the fire is, you can get on the roof of your church if you have the correct ground ladders, like 45 footers, that type of thing. Get up there, cut a hole, drop a Bresnan distributor in, and pump that if you put it in the right place. That'll do a good job of putting water. I should say a 2.5-inch Bresnan. The 1.5 inch is not worth owning. So put one of those in, Bresnan with a smooth bores, not with the little foggy things on it, and it provides good water supply inside. And so there are things that you can do. You can know how to get access, for instance, into the upper stories of the church. I mean, if there's an organ, you can get into the organ loft. So that's another potential for a fire. There's electrical up in there. If there's a choir loft at the other end and a church steeple, there's another access point into the roof. So you do have places that you can get in if you know to go there and you know to look for them. And you also are thinking about, how do I get out of here in a hurry? So you've got that planned also.
We should have had Chief Routley on here for a church discussion. He's probably been to a church fire or some similar type buildings over the years, being in Montreal or the island of Montreal and down in Phoenix,
Yeah,
wherever.
yeah, yeah. But the same thing with historic buildings, like in downtown Montreal, and like that recent guild hall that burned. Actually, it was a stock exchange in
In
was it in
Copenhagen.
Stockholm? Copenhagen, yeah. So a very
Copenhagen.
old, yeah, very old building built in the 15th century, I think it was,
Something
or
like that.
16th
Yep.
century,
Yep.
and was actually a place, and it's one of the original reasons for stock exchange, where they brought the boats in with their stock and they went in and they did their trading. And so essentially that's, they traded the actual goods instead of paper representation for goods, which is what we currently do in the stock exchange. And this extremely important, extremely historical building, and not sprinkled,
It was
right? You always have the
under
conversation
renovation.
about, yeah, you always have the conversation about sprinklering after the building burns. So, and that's a conversation you can have with your local church. Is it worth the cost of sprinklering? Maybe it is something to talk about.
Well,
Um,
but go on those historic buildings, because at the same time that happened, actually in Copenhagen, I believe it was the Society of Fire Protectioneers was meeting in Copenhagen the same week that fire occurred,
yes,
and right away it came up. The museum, I think in Brazil or Buenos Aires, that burned about 10 years ago. Again, no sprinklers because they didn't want to worry about a water leak and damaging this art. The Scottish Museum of Art or some university in Edinburgh had the same thing. There was one of the Crown's castles in the UK,
Edinburgh.
same,
Yeah, yeah,
that burned as well. And there was another
yeah.
museum
Westminster, I think it
somewhere.
was. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
we get these big buildings, and you have to protect them with sprinklers, or else we plan. Hey, in Little Fort, Saskatchewan, we're touring nothing really famously old or anything. We're touring the old railway station that was downtown, and the city runs it, and they rent it out for rentals and for parties and meetings and whatever. And we're going through this building. I'm the deputy fire chief, and I say to the lady who's in charge of cultural stuff, I said, "So, this building valuable to you?" Well, why, yes, of course. It's the heart of our downtown and our cultural area and our parks and everything. I go, so then why don't you have a fire alarm system in it? Well, I said, so you want it to burn for a couple hours before the police officer happens to drive by at 3 a.m. and notice smoke coming out the building. Then you're going to, oh yeah, I never thought of that. Like, you need a fire alarm in here. Is this building worth something? You got to protect it, and she's like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. It's like, well, who's going to discover the fire at 2 a.m? It'll be
Yeah,
too late.
yeah. And ditto for sprinklers. I mean, one of my other favorite sayings is, Wet things will dry, burn things don't unburn. So,
Yeah.
once you've lost it, it's gone. In many cases, it's gone forever.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think one of the main points is you need to have a game plan before it's game time. And that's
Nice.
true. Like we all like to say we're like sports teams, right? Well, sports teams have playbooks. They know they don't come up to the line of scrimmage and figure out their play then or what so have a game plan before. And it doesn't need it's all fine and dandy and great if your department does an official like pre-plan and has it in a binder and you can review it and whatever. But if they don't, there's nothing stopping a crew from sitting down at the kitchen table or hanging out with your buddies or on a Monday night training on a paid on call department. In the wintertime, go tour it. Even if you can't tour it, just talk about it. Hey, what would you do if that place was on fire? And because you might have an idea, they have an idea, you bring it up. And then at 2 a.m, when that place is on fire, you've already thought about it once or twice. So it doesn't need to be an official department pre-plan, which is good if you have that. And if you do, review it once in a while so that you know what you're doing. But it can be as simple as just have a conversation over a cup of coffee.
Yeah, you remember, Doug, we planned some exercises up at the university here in town. They've got some really old dormitory halls and university buildings. Then they have some newer ones too. Anyway, we went up there and we did some tours, which was good just to learn. And of course, it was scary to see the fire hazard because, hey, we're in rural Alberta and inspections are upon request or complaint only. So they don't happen. But anyway, we also did some
Maybe there's
drills.
a retired guy that should submit a lot of complaints in that city.
I really should. You're right. I should do that. I just don't want to be that guy. They could just get me to volunteer or pay me a minimal wage, and I'd go do inspections for them. But anyway, we went and did some drills there during the summer when there's no students, and they had recently, a few years before, changed their local university water system to the city water system. So they'd gone on and they merged, amalgamated into the city. City wanted taxes and the university wanted service. Excellent. Great. We go flow water. Guess what? We were doing big water drills because they got big buildings, big risks. No water. Like we couldn't flow a couple of 65s or a little blitz monitor.
This is how bad the water was. The hydrant was on. The high vol fell off the hydrant, and I put the high vol back on the hydrant without turning the hydrant off.
I didn't know that. It was terrible. Well, it turned out that what they did was, in order to meter the university's water, they diverted the main water line through a meter. And then they had a bypass that was it was a series of check valves. And if you put high demand on, the check valves were supposed to automatically bypass the meter for a fire. Well, it didn't work. And our chief at the time, Daryl Friesen, finally, I bugged him about it, and he went and he met with them, and he looked at it, and he said, yeah, he sent me pictures, I remember. And he said, well, obviously this doesn't work. You need to fix this because the place is going to burn down, and whoever touched this thing last is going to own it. And so hopefully it's fixed. I don't know. But, we did, the last chief here in Lacombe did hydrant flow tests around town. He hired a couple of students and they flowed hydrants and they measured the flow. They didn't just flow hydrants. They measured the flow as per ULC requirements or fire underwriters requirements. They actually did flow testing. So I don't know what it revealed, but, these are the kind of things that go to your high risk building, your church, your college or whatever, and flow test the hydrant. Put a blitz fire or a mercury, whatever they're called, on there. It's simple math, guys. Those are rated for 2,000 liters a minute. If you can flow 700, 1,000 kPa to a blitz with a reasonable short length of hose on it, you're getting 2,000 liters a minute. You don't need a flow meter to tell you that.
Which is nothing, by the way.
Which is nothing for a big fire, but I was just doing a bunch of
1,000 liters a minute is 400 U.S. gallons a minute. It's laughable. It's a single family residence.
But at least it's telling you what you got. Yeah. You're right. I was at an industrial plant recently doing training and we were struggling. I couldn't flow more than 5,000 off the hydrant liters a minute. And I was pushing for 7 or 8, but I didn't get it. But I had a hydrant in Fort Saskatchewan one time that did 13,000. That was impressive.
So one of the things that Doug was talking about was being prepared, talking about what you need and so forth. And when I was a county fire chief, I had 11 fire districts, 11 fire halls, and 9 of those easily were rural, very rural. And we needed to buy an aerial truck, an aerial platform truck to replace a 75-foot telesquirt. And most of these rural jurisdictions, rural councilors, did not support
Hmm.
spending $1 million or more on air. What do you need? I'm not contributing, so that your one town can have an aerial truck. So, I got a little interesting about that. So I said, well, you've got risks in your community too. So I went around and took pictures of all their churches and all their agricultural buildings and
I
all this
did the
stuff. And I
same
said,
thing.
well, this, I've got a binder and it says, here, this is your district, flip, flip, flip. So this is your church that we need an aerial truck to save if there's any chance of saving it. We're definitely not doing it with that 35-foot ground ladder that's on the bumper. And so, you need to do that. And you need to have a water supply. So anyway, so in the end of the day, they all understood that in fact it wasn't just for the town, it was for the whole county. And so we only bought the one aerial. We should have had more than one, but never mind. They got more than one now,
I
thankfully.
did I did the exact same thing here. The
Yeah,
town tried to get the county to sign a grant to you could get a grant for 100 grand from the province if they would go together. And the county did not want to sign the grant because we don't need no aerial truck. And so I drove around and I took pictures of all the huge equestrian barns and the huge rural churches and the huge greenhouses and potato barns and all this kind of stuff.
all
And
of
the
that.
chief
Yeah,
did a presentation. And lo and behold, about 2 years after we got the ladder truck, the county never did sign it. The ladder truck, we had a big a lot of potatoes around here, seed potatoes, and so big seed potato barn combination seed potato and machinery shop caught fire, and it was minus 37 below. And we brought the ladder out there because the top of the first concrete tilt up building in the machine shop part, and the rafters were all burning. And we brought the aerial up, and it was able to shoot down in between the rafters after the first part had fallen in and put the fire out. And it saved the building and the equipment that was inside it. And yet the county was like, "Well, we don't need that. There's no way. It's a 30-foot ceiling concrete tilt up building with 2 potato warehouses attached. You're not going to do that from the ground or a ground ladder." So,
right.
yep,
So the
pre-planning.
other part of the equation, and Doug also mentioned this, is about water supply. So one of the things that we looked at doing was putting cisterns in hamlets. So you'd put them in the if you look at fire underwriters, for instance, they give you credit for location for water supply. And if, for instance, you can have a sizable cistern or a static water source like a dry hydrant, anywhere within 1,000 feet of that is considered equivalent to having hydrant protection. So you can do this. You can put 20,000 gallon, 10,000 gallon cisterns, which is not very large actually when you think about it. You can bury them in the crossroads or near to the crossroads, concrete, and have the local fire department maintain them, put water into them. We had some where we had a local well, and the well would just be on a level control and would just municipally owned, and would just continue to put water in there. And that gave you the opportunity to provide improved fire insurance rates for this hamlet. So there's a payback. It also helped to get a better FUS rating. So there's a payback. It helped to also make people living in that area understand that, in fact, they had better fire protection than they had previously. So these are all things. These are long-term things that you need to put as part of your long-term planning for fire protection.
There,
And
there's a
you need to be thinking about this as fire chiefs.
There's a church here that got expanded greatly about 15 or 20 years ago, and as part of their expansion, the county made them. I was surprised they did this, but they made them put a water reservoir in. So the floor of the gymnasium is a gigantic water reservoir, and there's a big Storts coupling that is on the side of the building that we can go and draft from. It's a little close to the building, I thought, but whatever. We can start there anyway. And in Clearwater, of course, I had those dry hydrants all over the place, right, Doug? You went and tested them as I hired you as a day shifter to go out and flow test these dry hydrants and refill them. We had them all. I think we had 20 some in the end when I was done there.
Yeah, good fun days of trying to draft out of a really long pipe,
Yeah,
which takes a long time on the primer
it
that you're
was
not used
hard.
to when the dump tank's usually right beside your truck. But
Yeah, we're going
yeah,
like, is this
took a
working?
long time to get the water going, but it was good. It was fun pump training at the same time. Get your
Yeah,
hands
good
on the truck.
knowledge.
Yeah.
And you're out in the community. The fire truck's there. It's showing the people awareness, and it's all good.
But another part of, I was going to say, another component is being able to move water. So you need a properly functioning tanker system. I'd like to do a tailboard on tankers and water relays because I have the odd opinion on that that I would like
Yes,
to I'd like to share.
me
And
too.
the and yeah, and the other part, of course, that we haven't talked about here is high vol hose. Having enough hose, and you already talked about the university not having the capability of getting water in there, but I was a city fire chief also, and we had grids in that city where the water supply was like 6 inches, and industrial buildings, and you just didn't
Mhm.
have the water supply. But you know, 8, 10 blocks away, we had 24-inch mains. So we had the water, and we just carried oodles and oodles of high vol on at least one truck, and all of our pumpers carried 1,000 feet of high vol, so we could make up pumper relays if necessary, 5-inch too. So and move
Uh,
water as necessary because that was reflected on our local conditions. And I remember when I was a rural fire chief, one of the first conversations about introducing high vol was, well, we don't have water to fill the hose, let alone. And I would just say, really?
yeah, I know. I mean, we don't need that here. But anyway, we digress. So we'll come back to this one later. We could talk about tanker
Yeah,
shuttles and water flows and stuff. I've got some great examples with that and some lessons learned. I think Doug's got to go to work or something.
yeah.
And so thanks
But in
again,
summary,
everyone.
pre-plan, pre-plan,
Pre-plan,
pre-plan.
pre-plan. In summary, everybody, thanks for listening to another tailboard. I think the coffee's on in the kitchen, so we can quit jabbering and go have a coffee. Thanks for listening to the Emergency Traffic Podcast.